privileged children are,
And Elvis wanted her to have everything.
because he didn't really know. He too grew up very, very poor.
Yeah, poor.
And it's exactly what you said the other day. Poor, right.
Oh.
And he said,
What if the king of rock and roll never really left the building? What if Elvis Presley didn't die in 1977 but instead faked his death to escape the crushing weight of fame? This isn't just a wild conspiracy theory, it's a claim backed by shocking evidence and the most unlikely of sources. Priscilla Presley herself. Could the man who defined an era still be alive today, living under a new identity? And if so, is he hiding in plain sight as a humble preacher? The answer might be closer than you think. Elvis Presley's death in 1977 sent shockwaves through the world. Fans wept, tributes flooded in, and the music world was forever altered. But over the decades, one question has loomed larger than all others. Did he really die? As bizarre as it may seem, many have wondered if the king staged his death, vanishing into the shadows to live a life of peace away from the relentless glare of the spotlight. Enter Bob Joyce, a pastor in Arkansas whose resemblance to Elvis is uncanny. Same deep voice, same unmistakable mannerisms, and most startling of all, he never seems to outright deny the theory that he's the real Elvis Presley. When asked about it, Joyce has remained strangely tight-lipped, often responding with vague, cryptic remarks that only fuel the fire of speculation. But the intrigue doesn't stop there. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's ex-wife, has made comments that have left many questioning what she knows. Her responses to questions about Elvis's death are often evasive, almost as if she's hinting at a much bigger truth. Could she be guarding a secret about the man who once ruled the world? The idea that Elvis faked his death isn't just the stuff of tabloid rumors. It's a theory that grows stronger every year, fueled by the ongoing mystery of Pastor Bob Joyce and the eerie silence of those closest to him. Could it be that Elvis was driven to escape the suffocating pressure of fame? The life of the king was filled with highs and lows, but the lows, constant scrutiny, endless tours, and the destruction of his personal life were enough to make anyone crave escape. Was faking his death the only way Elvis could regain control of his life? Was he desperate enough to abandon everything, including the music world that adored him, to lead a simple, peaceful life in the shadows? As the evidence begins to pile up, one thing becomes clear. The story of Elvis Presley may not be over. In fact, it may have just begun. When you think of Elvis Presley, what comes to mind? The slicked back hair, the sparkling jumpsuits, the tantalizing voice that captivated millions. Now imagine that same man, Elvis Presley, reappearing in a completely different guise, stripped of his fame and fortune, but still undeniably the same person. It sounds like a far-fetched fantasy, but if you take a closer look at the evidence, you might start to believe that the king never truly left the building. Bob Joyce, a pastor in a small town in Arkansas, has spent decades quietly ministering to his congregation, all the while drawing increasingly suspicious attention due to his striking resemblance to Elvis Presley. For years, Joyce has kept a low profile, never publicly acknowledging the whispers and theories surrounding his identity. But the similarities are too much to ignore. If you were to see Bob Joyce in person, you'd be hard-pressed to find any distinguishing features that would suggest he's not the same man who once ruled Graceland. Let's begin with the basics. Joyce's voice. It's unmistakable, deep, rich, and powerful, with that familiar drawl that made Elvis one of the most iconic voices in the history of music. Many who have heard Joyce speak for the first time remark that they feel like they've been transported back in time. His speech patterns mirror Elvis's almost exactly. Long pauses, the same rhythmic cadence, the subtle intonations that were signature to the king himself. But it's not just his voice that's eerily similar to Elvis's. It's his mannerisms as well. The way he moves, the subtle gestures, the charisma that exudes from him, everything about Bob Joyce screams Elvis. Even though he's been living a quiet, relatively unknown life in the years since his supposed death. Now, let's talk about Joyce's appearance. The man is, quite frankly, Elvis in disguise. When seen from a distance, you could almost convince yourself that you've spotted a ghost from the past. His facial features, particularly his eyes, nose, and mouth, carry an uncanny resemblance to Elvis. In fact, many fans and conspiracy theorists have pointed out that Joyce looks like a more aged version of the king, with graying hair and a slight weight gain, but still bearing the same bone structure, same unmistakable charm. The Elvis signature of slicked back hair, sharp jawline, and intense gaze are still there, unmistakable as ever. But what about his life? Why would Elvis Presley, the most famous man on earth, suddenly disappear and assume the identity of a small-town preacher? It seems almost impossible to fathom, especially considering the heights of fame Elvis achieved. And yet, this is where the theory begins to take shape. According to some, Elvis was no longer able to handle the crushing pressures of being a worldwide sensation. The fame, the constant scrutiny, the media frenzy, it became too much. Rumors swirled for years that Elvis was tired of the spotlight and at the height of his fame began to contemplate a life away from the cameras. The idea of a reclusive Elvis Presley isn't new. In fact, during the final years of his life, there were already whispers that Elvis was struggling with his health, his addictions, and his inability to find peace. Some claim that he faked his death in 1977 to escape these pressures, and in doing so, he created a new life for himself, a life of solitude, away from the public's prying eyes. And the man living in Arkansas preaching the Word of God could very well be that very person. As strange as it may seem, the evidence points to a deeper mystery. And what makes this theory even more intriguing is the eerie silence surrounding the people who should know the most about Elvis's life: his family, his closest friends, and his ex-wife Priscilla Presley. Priscilla's statements on the matter are perhaps the most chilling pieces of the puzzle. Over the years, she's made several cryptic comments that suggest she knows more than she lets on. In interviews, Priscilla has been careful with her words when asked about Elvis's death. She doesn't deny that he died in 1977, but there's always a lingering doubt in her responses, as if she's holding back a truth too explosive to reveal. Could she know that Elvis faked his death? Could she have been part of a grand plan to protect his secret and help him disappear into obscurity? Her hesitation to fully deny the rumors has only fueled the fire, leaving fans and skeptics alike wondering if there's a deeper truth at play. While the evidence may seem far-fetched to some, those who believe Elvis faked his death argue that all of these pieces align perfectly. Bob Joyce's similarities to Elvis are undeniable. His quiet life as a pastor away from the spotlight could very well be the new life Elvis craved. And Priscilla's odd responses leave room for speculation. Could it be that the king never left us? And could he still be living in plain sight, a mere shadow of his former self, watching as his legacy continues to thrive? The more you dig into the theory that Elvis Presley faked his death, the more it begins to make sense. Elvis was not just a musician, he was an international icon, a cultural phenomenon. His every move was watched, analyzed, and dissected by the media. His personal life became as much of a spectacle as his musical career. And while Elvis enjoyed the adoration of millions, there was always a darker side to his fame, one that grew heavier with each passing year. In the early days of his career, Elvis was a fresh-faced star with an untamed energy that captivated audiences across the world. His rise to fame was meteoric, and his popularity knew no bounds. But as the years went on, the pressures of living in the spotlight began to take a toll. Elvis, who had once been a wild, free-spirited performer, became increasingly reclusive and disillusioned. The same public who once adored him began to turn on him, criticizing his appearance, his weight, his lifestyle choices. His personal struggles with addiction and depression became public knowledge, and the constant barrage of negative press weighed heavily on him. At the peak of his fame, Elvis was no longer the vibrant young man who had set the world on fire with his music. He was a shadow of himself, exhausted by the demands of stardom, the never-ending tours, and the invasion of his privacy. For someone as fiercely independent as Elvis, the idea of constantly being under the microscope must have been suffocating. And then there was his family. Elvis's relationship with his ex-wife Priscilla was fraught with tension, and their divorce in 1973 only added to his emotional turmoil. Elvis's strained relationship with his daughter, Lisa Marie, also weighed on him heavily. His personal life was in shambles, and the man who had once ruled Graceland now seemed lost and uncertain of his place in the world. The idea that Elvis could have faked his death to escape this nightmare no longer seems as implausible as it once did. What makes this theory even more compelling is the fact that Elvis was never known for his desire for money or fame. Unlike many other stars who seek to prolong their careers and bask in the limelight for as long as possible, Elvis had always been somewhat of an enigma. He wasn't interested in fame for fame's sake. He wanted peace. He wanted privacy. And after years of being trapped in the gilded cage of superstardom, it's entirely plausible that he chose to escape forever. In the years leading up to his death, Elvis had become a shell of his former self. He had gained weight, his health had deteriorated, and he seemed far removed from the electrifying performer who had once brought down the house. By 1977, he was exhausted, burned out, and ready to walk away from it all. And so the theory goes, Elvis decided to disappear. He faked his own death, leaving behind his fortune, his fame, and his public persona. In doing so, he gained something far more valuable: his privacy. By assuming the identity of Bob Joyce, Elvis could live a quiet, peaceful life far from the prying eyes of the media. He could preach, help others, and find the solace he so desperately sought. But what he didn't anticipate was how the world would continue to hold on to his legacy, constantly searching for answers, never quite willing to let go of the king. Could it be that Elvis is still with us, living in plain sight, hiding behind the name of a humble pastor? The evidence is there, and the more you dig, the more it begins to make sense. The king might never have truly left us. He might just be living a different life, in the shadows, waiting for the world to finally understand the truth. For many fans, the idea of Elvis still being alive isn't just about a fascination with his music or his legacy. It's a hope that something as extraordinary as his life could continue in secret. There's something inherently comforting about the thought that a legend like Elvis could transcend death, becoming something more than just a figure in history. In this world where we often feel like legends fade and icons die, the possibility that Elvis Presley is still out there offers a strange kind of solace. It's not hard to understand why people want to believe. Elvis was more than a singer. He was a cultural force, shaping music, fashion, and even social movements. He was an embodiment of rebellion, freedom, and charisma. He represented a time when anything seemed possible, and when the impossible became real. Elvis wasn't just a rock star, he was an icon who stood for something bigger. For millions of people, the idea that Elvis could still be around, still alive, still out there, still somehow defying time, feels like the ultimate testament to his greatness. This is where the theory begins to capture hearts. By suggesting that Elvis could have faked his death, it offers a sense of hope. Perhaps the king, burdened by the weight of fame and the madness that surrounded his life, simply chose to disappear. And if he did, it gives fans the tantalizing idea that he's still out there. Maybe watching, maybe smiling, maybe enjoying a life he always wanted but could never have while under the watchful eye of the public. Take, for example, the way people react when they see Bob Joyce speak or perform. Many fans who've attended Joyce's sermons have expressed shock at the similarities they notice. It's more than just his voice. There's a presence, a charisma, a mannerism that seems too familiar. One could chalk it up to coincidence, but for others, it's a direct link to Elvis himself. When you listen to Joyce sing, there's an uncanny resemblance to Elvis's vocal style. The deep, rich tones, the smoothness of his delivery, the way the lyrics flow. It's as though Elvis himself is still singing. Fans who were alive during the height of Elvis's career cannot help but hear echoes of the king in every note Bob Joyce sings. These fans who have lived through the cultural revolution that Elvis ushered in are not ready to let go. They've seen the footage of Elvis's last days, heard the stories, and know all too well the kind of toll fame takes on a person. The notion that Elvis faked his death resonates because it taps into their need for closure, their need for a hero who will never die, even if the world thinks he has. And the deeper you go into this mystery, the more you see that the theory provides a kind of spiritual answer. Elvis didn't just leave the public eye, he became a preacher. Some believe that after the chaos of his music career, he found peace in spreading spiritual messages and helping others. His decision to abandon the stage for a pulpit isn't just a retreat from fame, it's an act of redemption. The king, once a figurehead of excess and rebellion, could have chosen a path of humility and service. The man who once defined rock and roll might have wanted to help others find meaning in life beyond fame and fortune. This line of thinking resonates with many fans who feel that Elvis's life and career were far more complex than the public ever realized. The idea that Elvis, weary of the world's demands, would retire to live in private, preaching a message of hope, only adds to his mystique. The king, instead of fading into oblivion, could have transitioned into a role that made him a guide for others. Still alive, still a source of inspiration, but no longer needing the adulation of millions. And so the question becomes, Not did Elvis fake his death, but what if he did? What if, by stepping away from the spotlight, Elvis achieved the peace he so desperately sought? The theory isn't just about conspiracy. It's about a love for a man who changed the world and a desire to believe that something as incredible as Elvis Presley's life could never truly end. To understand why the theory of Elvis faking his death resonates with so many, you have to first grasp the sheer magnitude of his legacy. Elvis Presley wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural touchstone, a symbol of rebellion, freedom, and creative genius. His impact on music, fashion, and the very idea of celebrity is immeasurable. But more than that, Elvis was a phenomenon, one that transcended time, place, and genre. When Elvis first burst onto the scene in the mid-1950s, he completely revolutionized music. His rockabilly sound, combined with a provocative stage presence, shook the music world to its core. He was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. And then just when it seemed like he was unstoppable, he reinvented himself in the 1960s, moving into Hollywood films and solidifying his status as a pop culture icon. His image was everywhere, from the movie screens to the radio waves to the lives of the millions who adored him. But the world he created for himself was not one without its challenges. The demands of fame were crushing. The constant media attention, the endless tours, the scrutiny of his every move. It was all too much. For someone as sensitive and private as Elvis, the spotlight wasn't a thrill. It was a prison, and it's within this prison that the seeds of the theory began to sprout. Perhaps in the face of everything, Elvis chose to disappear. It would make sense given the kind of person he was, a man of contradictions, a performer who couldn't escape the roles forced upon him, and a man who just wanted to live his life free of judgment. But even if Elvis did choose to step away from public life, it doesn't mean that his impact faded. It is, in fact, his legacy that makes this theory so compelling. Elvis never truly left the world. His music still plays on the radio, his films are still watched by millions, and his persona is as alive today as it ever was. Fans continue to flock to Graceland, pilgrimage sites for Elvis enthusiasts who cannot bear to let go of the king. And let's not forget the multitude of impersonators, tribute artists, and even casual fans who continue to emulate his style, his look, and his sound. Elvis is everywhere. That's what makes the theory of his fake death so poignant. Elvis never really left. The King of Rock never stopped being a part of the world. His music lives on in every generation, and his legacy is woven into the fabric of pop culture. He didn't have to fake his death to remain relevant. He already was. But imagine for a moment, what if Elvis did fake his death? What if he made the conscious choice to step away, to disappear, to live a life outside of the public's eyes, in the service of others, in the quiet of a preacher's pulpit? The theory elevates his life story to a whole new level of intrigue. It suggests that the king was not just a victim of fame, but a man who sought to transcend it, to be remembered for his music, not his notoriety. As the years go by, Elvis's influence only grows. New generations of fans discover his music and his story, while older fans continue to celebrate his legacy. The idea that Elvis faked his death doesn't diminish his greatness. If anything, it amplifies it, suggesting that he could walk away from the stage, disappear from the public eye, and still remain the most important figure in the history of rock and roll. His impact is timeless, and his legacy has become as enduring as the man himself. When you take a step back and examine everything, the eerie similarities between Bob Joyce and Elvis Presley, the cryptic statements from Priscilla Presley, and the fact that Elvis had the means and motive to disappear, you begin to see how the theory of Elvis faking his death could be true. It's not just a random collection of wild ideas. There's something in the evidence that feels undeniably real. Bob Joyce's mannerisms, voice, and appearance are too much of a coincidence to ignore. The idea that Elvis, known for his eccentricities, could have reinvented himself as a humble preacher is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Elvis was a man who constantly reinvented himself throughout his career. This would just be another chapter in his transformation, and the silence surrounding Bob Joyce's identity speaks volumes. If he were truly Elvis Presley, he wouldn't have to deny it. His life, his actions, and his choices could speak for themselves. What's most compelling is how the evidence fits together. The uncanny resemblance to Elvis, the cryptic comments from Priscilla, the deliberate silence surrounding Bob Joyce's past, and the overall desire for privacy that Elvis clearly sought in his final years. If Elvis wanted to disappear, he certainly had the means to do so. And in choosing the life of a preacher, he could have achieved something far more profound than he ever did as a superstar. Now we turn it over to you. What do you think? Could Elvis Presley really be alive today? Could the king have chosen to walk away from the stage and into a new life? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your own theories. Whether you believe Elvis faked his death or think it's all just coincidence, your voice matters in keeping this story alive. Elvis may have left the stage, but his story is far from over. The mystery, the legacy, and the legend continue. Now it's your turn to be part of the conversation.